Good evening. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you. I'm Karen Tucker, CEO of the Churchill Club, and it's such a pleasure to see so many people from the R&D world in particular in the audience. I'm probably going to get in a lot of trouble if I start naming names, but I can't resist. We've got Mr. Gene Amdahl in the audience this evening, and we've got Glenn Edens and Gordon Bell, and on and on. And so just a great crowd. Our sponsor and host is Microsoft, and I'd like to ask you to please join me in thanking them for their generosity. This program is part of a series that's focused on technology and society, and through Microsoft sponsorship, we have been able to put on some programs that have helped spread insight, and we've had some fun with the topics as well. Certainly some intensely important and interesting topics, and tonight's R&D focus is no exception. The news is filled with commentary on its critical importance to compete and lately even to survive. Our distinguished speakers are Josephine Cheng, Judy Estrin, Rick Rashid, Sue Siegel, and Michael Mandel. Thank you all so much for being here. And I'd like to mention 3 upcoming events that we hope will be of interest to all of you. First, on Monday, March 16, we present Venture Capital Roundtable, Trends and Strategies 2009, led by Jeff Yang of Redpoint, and including Jay Hogue from Technology Crossover Ventures, Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn, and Matt Murphy from Kleiner Perkins. And then next, on Friday, March 20, we offer a breakfast program called Capitalizing on the Billion-Dollar-Plus Energy Efficiency Opportunity, led by John Rockwell of Element Partners, with speakers from PG&E, Nth Power, Enernoc, and IBM. And then finally, on April 7th, we present a fireside chat about entrepreneurism with Uber entrepreneur Elon Musk, in conversation with well-respected journalist Michael Malone. For you who might not be familiar with the Churchill Club, we are the premier business and technology speaker forum here in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, a nonprofit institution uniquely serving our community for over 23 years. We present about 3 high-quality, highly relevant programs per month, and we currently have 6,000 members. And if you are not a member and you enjoy tonight's program, we do hope that you will consider, of course, joining us. Your support is meaningful to us, and we do appreciate it very much. And we make it very easy for you simply by visiting churchillclub.org. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Michael Mandel. Michael will kick off and help guide the conversation this evening, and we fully expect him to personally contribute to the discussion as well. He is chief economist and lead economics writer at BusinessWeek. He earned a PhD in economics from Harvard and has been writing about innovation and growth since the 1990s. He was actually named one of the top 100 business journalists of the 20th century for his coverage of the new economy in 2000. And most recently, he wrote a story about innovation economics that was published in September 2008, just before Lehman went under. And he is the only economics journalist who has written a textbook. It's called Economics: The Basics, just out from McGraw-Hill. And unlike most textbooks, it even has a chapter on innovation and technological change. And we really appreciate that he flew out from the East Coast to be with us this evening, so let's give a warm welcome to Michael Mandel.
I'm just going to give a really brief introduction here before moving on to the panel. The first thing I wanted to say is that I'm really glad to be out here. I know that things are tough in the Valley, but you know, coming out from New York City, we're having a major extinction event out there. Okay, the BusinessWeek McGraw-Hill building is just down the block from Lehman, and it was pretty amazing. One day, it was bustling with activity. Black cars lined up outside every hour of the day or night. The next day, nothing. It vanished. So it's actually nice to be out here. Let's start with what we know. Okay, innovation drives growth. We all know that. On the supply side of the economy, innovation translates into bigger productivity gains and increased output. But what people don't usually think about is that innovation drives the demand side of the economy as well. People didn't know that they wanted an automobile before they saw their friend driving a Model T. They didn't know that they wanted an iPod until they saw their friends using one. New products and services stimulate demand. So that without innovation, and I firmly believe this, okay, without innovation we have stagnation or worse. So let me set the stage for tonight's panel. The first question, the first topic really, is that can innovation help us escape the economic and financial crisis? And there's a lot of sub-questions that come along with this. Are there any new technologies or products on the horizon which can supply the economic boost that we need? Do we need more R&D support from the government? Or can companies be induced to take innovation more seriously? Does the crisis make people more willing to try new things? Or is the financial collapse making it harder for firms to raise money or to go public? That's one set of questions. Really, can innovation pull us out? The second set of questions really has to do with the causes of the crisis. And the question is, did an innovation drought or an innovation shortfall help cause the crisis? And let me actually sort of explain what I mean by that. Most of us, certainly most of us in this room, think of the U.S. as the world's most innovative country, and that may be part of the problem. Over the past decade, we were quite cavalier about offshoring production of our leading-edge technologies, not just infotech, but drugs and medical equipment as well. A statistic that you probably don't know is that pharmaceutical imports rose from $10 billion in 2000 to $46 billion in 2008. Today, we import roughly about $100 billion in drugs and medical equipment. By comparison, we import about $25 billion in toys and games. Okay? So this is kind of, we've offshored the production of our crown jewels. Nevertheless, over this stretch, what happened was that the U.S. kept spending and borrowing, and the rest of the world was willing to lend us large sums of money. Why is this? I think the assumption that everybody had was that the U.S., having shifted its crown jewels overseas, was going to keep inventing new stuff, and that new stuff was going to pay for all the imports. But there's a case to be made at this moment, and it's very important for this larger question of what's going to happen to innovation. There's a case to be made that we fell short innovation-wise. In biotech, we made a lot of scientific progress, but commercialization turned out to be a very slow process. Progress was also slow in energy-related technologies. And in infotech, well, I'm sure that everybody in this audience has their own view about what the rate of progress has been in information technology. But I'll just make 2 points. One is that if you look at infotech stocks adjusted for inflation, they were no higher in 2007 than they were in 1997. And the second thing is that some of the most exciting developments in information technology, the social media, okay, no one quite knows what to do with yet. We like them, but we don't know what to do with them. Okay, so what I wonder is whether or not the financial crisis came because the global economy bet on U.S. innovation, and it just didn't happen as quickly as we had hoped. So let me finish up my short intro, and I hope I'm running under 3 minutes because that's what I promised. Okay, let me finish up by reading a short excerpt from a book that I wrote in 2004 about the future of innovation called Rational Exuberance. You may not have heard about it because it sold so few copies that I should have just given it away. Seriously, okay? I would have done a lot less damage to my reputation by just making it free. This was generally an optimistic book, okay? But here's what I wrote at the time, and I wish that I had remembered this. What I wrote is, if the pace of innovation slows, quote, it will become a lot harder to service all the debt that companies and people took on during the 1990s. Housing prices will slump and perhaps even plummet. That was one negative paragraph in a very optimistic book. Okay. I'm an optimistic guy. Of course, the reverse can be true as well. Innovation can help pull us out of the downturn, just as a lack of innovation may have helped get us into it. And on that cheerful note, we turn to today's conversation Okay? And let me just briefly introduce our distinguished panelists. First is Judy Estrin, who's the CEO of JLABS and the author of a new book called Closing the Innovation Gap, published in September 2008, which is really a wonderful book. I do have to say, in the honor of conflict of interest, it was published by McGraw-Hill, who, of course, is the owner of BusinessWeek. So, second up will be Rick Rashid, Senior Vice President of Research for Microsoft. Next is Josephine Cheng, IBM Fellow and Vice President of the IBM Almaden Research Center. And then Sue Siegel, Partner of Mohr Davidow Ventures. And our lone life sciences representative, please treat her nicely. Okay? And the way that we're going to do this is that each of the panelists will take 3 or 4 minutes to sort of on any portion of this topic that they want. And they are encouraged and or allowed to sort of interrupt each other. Then I will ask some questions, and then in fairly short order, depending on how it works out, we'll sort of get to questions from the audience, because we'd really like this to be a conversation and not just a monologue, dialogue, or whatever is the pentalogue. Okay? So with all due respect, go ahead.
First, let me say it's fun to look out at the audience and realize how many people. I interviewed over 100 people for my book, and there is I don't know, about 7 of them sitting in this room. So thank you for those of you who contributed. And it is very hard for me to respond to your question in 3 minutes.
Take 4 minutes.
No. So
okay.
I'm going to...
Take 4 minutes. Okay, if you do TV, you learn that 4 minutes is enough to say almost anything.
Right. So I'm just going to throw out a couple of thoughts about the topic that hopefully will help contribute to our conversation. The first is that you asked the question whether or not a drought in innovation, what I call an innovation deficit, which is that we're reaping the benefits of seeds that we planted decades ago. And it's not that there's not a lot of innovation going on. There is a lot of innovation going on, but it is increasingly balanced towards incremental innovation as opposed to planting the seeds for the future. So that innovation deficit, you asked whether it caused the financial crisis or the economic crisis, which are really 2 very different things. One is the problem we have in the fundamentals of our economy and getting back to growth. The other is the problems with the financial system. And I actually believe that the same things that caused the innovation deficit caused the financial crisis, the same underlying themes. And that is that the country overall has become increasingly short-sighted. And the culture of business in this country, whether it is how we, business and Washington, so whether it's how we fund research from Washington or corporations, how we take research into the marketplace through venture capitalists and entrepreneurs, how large corporations are pushed from Wall Street, and how Wall Street itself has valued trading and flipping over building and creating. And it is really that culture of short-sightedness, thinking about, it's human nature to be self-serving. But we don't any longer think about self-serving in terms of long-term prosperity, which would include others doing well also. We tend to think about short-term greed. And it is that basic shift, I think, in the culture that has led to an innovation deficit, because there are lots of pieces to this puzzle. It's not just the government, it's not just science, it's not just VCs, although it is all of those things combined. It's what also led, I believe, to the financial crisis. And it is also what I believe is the problem with our economy now, in that we have come off of a major cycle, and we do not have the wherewithal to kick into another cycle. And we should, as we think about it, I'll to say one more thing, is that the next cycle won't necessarily, and probably necessarily won't, look like the last cycle. It won't. Hopefully it won't look like the last cycle, in that we don't need another bubble. We need to get to sustainable growth. Even if that growth is slower, that is better for us than these continual bubbles. But more importantly, the last cycle was driven by enterprise and personal productivity and quality of life in terms of healthcare. Those were the 2 things that really drove technology in biotech, in infotech, and created economic growth. I don't believe that the next cycle is going to be driven by productivity. I think we have gotten to a level that will continue to grow, but not at the same rate. So there will be other driving factors, and whether it's energy technologies, whether it is healthcare, whether it is education, whether it is things that we don't yet know about, there is going to be other drivers. And so we need to not look at the last cycle. We really need to be thinking about what we need to be doing for the next one.
Not looking back.
Yeah.
Okay. Rick?
Was that
Well,
longer than 4 minutes?
Whatever it was fine.
Okay, that was 4.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting to me in a way. I run a basic research group, so a long-term basic research group for Microsoft. I've been doing it for almost 18 years. We were joking earlier. You know, Michael said he's been doing his job for 20 years. So obviously we can't find other jobs. Okay, that's
true. I can't go anywhere else.
Yeah, but it says something to me about the way a lot of people think about long-term basic research. That one of the questions I most often get when people ask me about my group is, so what are your priorities? You know, where are you making your biggest investments? I mean, you know, what areas do you think are the most important? Because when you're thinking about long-term basic research, those are not really good questions to be asking. The questions to be asking are, you know, do you have the smartest possible people? Are they being given the right environment in which to work? Are they being given the freedom to sort of follow where they want to go? And then on the other end, are you harvesting their, you know, when they've got great ideas and they pan out, you know, sort of at the other end of the innovation pipeline, are you harvesting them and taking advantage of them, sort of no matter where it actually takes you? You know, and I think that's a problem that we've gotten into over the last, well, certainly in the last administration. You know, there was a tendency in terms of investment in science and engineering to be much more shorter-term focused, either because there were sort of directed actions to do that for some of the agencies, or in other cases it just happened because the amount of money that was available got to be so small that people brought their sites in. You know, when you're only funding, you know, 1 out of every 10 proposals at the NSF in computer science, you know, the peer review committees start to get conservative, right? Because they say, well, wait a minute, we could only fund 1 out of every 10, so which one do we take, right? And you start intrinsically getting conservative when you do that. You know, I think you have to think of innovation as being a pipeline. You make investments, you don't have any idea where they're actually going, and you're betting on people in the first part of it. And at the other end, you're harvesting and you're taking advantage of them. I think in terms of, you know, thinking about ways of getting out of where we are now, I mean, one hope is that both companies and maybe investments from the government can help accelerate that sort of final step, you know, once ideas have started to pan out, of bringing them to market. And certainly hard times have a way of making everybody work a little harder.
That's right. And
a little smarter and a little more focused at that part of the process. One of the things that I've told my own research group recently was, you know, nobody really likes hard times, but this is when other people need you the most, right? If you've got smart ideas, if you've come up with things, and these aren't the things the new stuff that you're working on. This is the stuff you already figured out. Now may be a good time to sell those ideas, right? To push some things that maybe didn't have a home, intellectual home, and get them out the door. So I think that, you know, I think we've probably been underinvested. Certainly, if you look at the American Academies of Arts and Sciences ARISE report or the Gathering Storm report for the National Academy of Engineering, they certainly sounded that alarm. But my hope is now we're going to try to turn that around, and certainly, you know, at least within Microsoft, we're trying to make those kinds of investments.
Now, I got a math degree in my undergraduate, so I'm looking at the historic data. And this is really taken from Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, year 2002. And it said that for every 40 to 60 years, there are cycles or waves that are characterized by alternating period of invention, when investment spending slow down, and deployment, periods of deployment, and when investment spending increasing rapidly and growth rapidly. And it just turned out that 1971 is the last wave, when we have the information age and telecommunication. So what that says is this is about time that it slowed down. So my answer to your question is what is really the cause of all this crisis? And I would say is destiny. Is like the Chinese saying, 命运. So that's what it happened. So now, but however, the Chinese character for crisis is we make up of opportunities. That causes crisis. Then it also generates opportunity. So if you write the Chinese word on crisis, it has the opportunity. So I think there are lots of opportunities. So this is really the wealth of opportunity. And so if you're looking at also back on the innovation, are we really lack of the innovation? I don't think there's really lack of innovation. So I'm looking back in IBM, we do have a well-balance of investment on the short term and also long-term commitments in research. Example will be like 5 years ago, IBM is also promoting on service research. And I know when I was studying in a college, that's a long time ago, and that was really the time when they first have computer science. So with 30 years, in the period of 30 years, that should be different kind of discipline. So that's why we introducing service research. And recently, also Stanford, Dean also wrote a report and saying that it's very important for engineering to have multidiscipline, not just only engineering, getting another discipline, like biomedical engineering, then become bioengineering. So very important to have the multiple discipline. That is also one of the principles of service research. And we also, now if you're looking at, there are many changes in IBM research. And unlike in 20 years, I don't know how many changes, you say shouldn't be changed. Actually, in IBM research, we are changing many times. So if I'm looking at research in the old time, because I've been with IBM for long, so I can do the testimony. And it's really very private, closed, very closed. Don't talk to other people. If we have something good, we use it proprietary. We don't want to share. That was really long time ago. And then gradually, then we go and say we should go and working closer to the development. So it's open up a little to development. And that's when I was also working, I'm from development side, working with the research. And then a little bit later and say, we should more listen to the customers. So we will have customer involvement. And more, if you're looking now, we are really very open. We drive the standards. We go and work with the business partner. And we even go and form something called collaboratory. You couldn't find it in the dictionary. Collaboration, laboratory, collaboratory. And I was so surprised and so happy to see that last Friday when I went to the Citrus, which is UC Berkeley Center of Research for the Interest of Community. They have a grand opening last Friday. And they call one of the things collaboratory, wireless and sensors collaboratory. So we are now also moving into collaboratory. So you're seeing that, why IBM almost 100 years, in 2011, it will be 100 years in history. It's because we are constantly changing, constantly moving, not just only investing on the short term, it's a well-balanced on short term and long term. You cannot, everything is long term, because you need to have some of the investment for the long term come from the short term. So I think that is very important, short term and long term. So I can talk more and more about all that for hours, but I think my 3 minutes is up.
I think so. Did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say I'm not going to argue with mathematical data that you have sitting in front of you, but I just want to make sure that we as an industry and as a country do not use the fact that it may or may not be destiny to let ourselves off the hook, because we have all contributed to this problem, and I think that unless we recognize that, we won't do the right things to get it forward. So I know you're being controversial and a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I just wanted to, I don't want anybody to walk out of this room saying, well, it's destiny, so there's nothing we can do about it.
See,
Because
I
that's not the
catch Judy
answer.
attention.
No, it's the Greek tragedy view of the whole thing, right? It's like, it was predestined, and, have to marry my mother, and, it gets all bad.
We'll come back.
No, I didn't say it's all bad. I think there's opportunities.
We'll come back to that again.
Okay.
Let's give Sue her chance here.
Yeah, so one of these things does not look like the other because I am here to sort of represent the biotech healthcare arena. And I have to say, while I agree with the general thematic on what is going on as with sort of the paucity of innovation, if you like, I would say that in biotech and in healthcare, in fact, the innovations and discoveries have been many, many. And what has happened is they've been celebrated in the media, they've been celebrated in the press, they're part of being on the benchtop, but what has not happened is the commercialization of those to us, the patient or the consumer. And so part of what needs to happen in terms of innovation, where healthcare has been in crisis for quite some time. So it's not just the economic crisis that has really brought this to bear in healthcare. Innovation is spawned, and what is now starting to happen is, in fact, business model innovation is starting to occur. Jiffy Lube meets healthcare, Minute Clinic, Ready Clinic, et cetera, right? The Human Genome Project, as it relates to what, in fact, is all about personalized medicine, and really being able to bring that now into the utility of patients. One of our very own, Genomic Health, here in Silicon Valley, started off around 1999-2000, and they were able to take the Human Genome Project and take the digitized information now of our consensus genome and now make products from it that in fact help women with breast cancer in terms of understanding either therapeutic or recurrence. Nothing has been done before on this. It used to take about 17 years for anything to get into standard of care in medicine. Genomic Health took about 7 or 8, which is fantastic. So when you look at that, in fact, there is innovation occurring. However, there is no doubt that the pace of rate and growth of our population to really age and the chronic diseases because of our lifestyle is causing this healthcare crisis, which is much more about GDP. Now, that all being said, I fundamentally believe that healthcare has been sort of this bastion of establishment, and it is now, because of what has been brought to bear in information technology and a number of different areas as it relates to semiconductors, bringing the conversion of those tools to healthcare has been phenomenal and will start to really push, I believe, a lot of innovation going forward to really benefit us in biotech and healthcare.
Okay.
So, Mike, before you go, can I make another controversial statement?
Go right
on the
ahead.
cost? So what causes all this crisis? I think there's another cause, that is we have too many MBAs and lawyers.
How do you feel about economists?
No, economists
Yeah,
are okay.
economists are okay.
There are not that many PhD economists that cause problems.
Okay.
So we need to go back to focusing on basic science and technology, and focusing on mathematics and all that, and focus on education. Don't go and get people into MBA, lawyer, and all those. Right? That's the process.
There have been studies done sort of linking the number of lawyers in a country to its rate of growth.
Inversely proportional.
Okay, the question that I want to address here, it's actually sort of really twofold, is either there's an innovation problem, or if we sort of think that we need more innovation to help get us out of the economic and financial crisis. Okay. There's obviously a role for government, what government might do. Then there's obviously a role for companies, okay? And these are really sort of two separate questions. So let's actually start. Which one should we start with, the companies or the government? Let's start with the government, okay? Since we're in an era of massive government intervention and activism, okay? What should government be doing at this point? Should they be spending more? Should they be operating differently? Is there something they should be doing?
So I think the same way companies need to think about today's environment and long term, the government has to do the same thing. And so there are certain things that the government is doing to stop the bleeding, stop the downward spiraling, creating jobs. But at the same time, where innovation comes to play is, yes, you can be innovative in thinking about what you do for stimulus, but the real place innovation comes in is looking at what jobs are going to be available 3, 5, 10 years from now. And when you are, or 20 years from now, when you look at that, the role of government, from my perspective, is several things. One is vision and leadership and inspiration. One of the key problems, and you mentioned the last administration, is we need to recognize that as a country the psyche of the nation has been one of being afraid and being uninvolved, afraid and going shopping. When you lead in that way and make people afraid and not involve them, you turn off innovation. If you inspire and rally, as JFK did, as the current president often does, you create a different environment for innovation. So the first is using the bully pulpit to make sure that we're focusing on the importance of science, on the importance of innovation. The second is funding research, because research is for the good of society, not for the good of just one company.
You mean funding basic research?
Funding basic research and some applied, but for the most part, funding basic research. The third is education. And there's just no question about we are not educating our kids for the skills that they need going forward in the 21st century. And then the fourth is looking at policy. And there is a whole range of policy that can either kill innovation or encourage innovation. And there are so many unintended consequences of the policies that are made that people often are not aware of in terms of their impact on how people invest, what they invest in, what behaviors people have. So an example is anything from energy subsidies to not going ahead with the tax benefits of alternative energies like solar. So you subsidize corn, but you don't encourage people to buy solar. It molds the market. Long-term capital gains. Is 1 year long-term? I don't think 1 year is long-term. So there are things you could do with cap gains taxes, for instance, to encourage long-term if you wanted. That's an example not of something that's done. Temporary R&D tax credits. How do you decide how to act if a tax credit is temporary? So there's all sorts of things that influence how people act. And so I think that there are lots of levers, and that the government can play a role in all of those. And then the last thing I just want to say is that the financial crisis has had the impact of further exacerbating the fact that we don't have liquidity in the market. We have no IPO market, essentially, for small companies. And without an IPO market, you don't have a venture entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so until we solve that problem, we really can't depend on entrepreneurs to do what entrepreneurs do so well.
Yes.
I have a comment on, no, I'm really a supporter of Obama's stimulus package. However, I think we need to go and spend money to stimulate the economy, but we do need to spend it wisely. So that's the thing that I'm really worried on, whether we spend it wisely. So I really agree on creating jobs. So creating jobs to build roads is good, but we should go and build roads for the 21st century. So if you're looking at around the world, especially in Stockholm, UK, Singapore, they are building intelligent transportation system. But what are we doing building roads? Just building the road for the repairing sake? It's not bringing us into the technology, bringing up advancements. So that I am really very concerned. So I do think that company can go and play an important role, or every individual should play an important role to influence and make sure it executed, all the money are spent wisely to bring up the technology and advancement capability for United States.
Sue?
So government did play a very big role as it relates to the innovation of the Human Genome Project.
That's right.
Without it, we wouldn't have been able to accomplish it. Now, the last few years, in fact, there has not been an increase in terms of the funding that was occurring at the NIH and the NSF. And just now with the stimulus package, in fact, we just put in, or just has been approved, about $10 billion to go that route. So innovations will continue. But where I do believe the government needs to, and again, I'm being very healthcare focused, so excuse me if this isn't your area, but this is a plea for you to really tell your Congress folks that they need to do something about this, is that, in fact, the reason why these innovations don't get out is the regulatory hurdles and the way our system is currently set up, such as reimbursement. We incent for sickness, for sick care. We do not incent for prevention. Vaccines, and when you think about it. So the government, I do think, has a tremendous role to play as it relates both to being able to clarify and help the FDA get more funding so they, in fact, can be more, if you'd like, nimble as it relates to the understanding of all of the complexities of the technologies that are coming out now that are coming into the healthcare system to help us be healthier. And in the reimbursement area, I do think there needs to be a fundamental shift as it relates to being able to actually incent prevention and health span, talking about health span versus just lifespan. So I do think government plays a tremendous role.
So you're talking about innovation more broadly. You're talking about innovation
Absolutely.
in institutions as well as innovation technology.
Well, it was to Judy's point. She talked also about education. You know, like it or not, think about it this way. So when we go to a doctor, you are asked about your family history, right? And they ask you about what have you done recently, so the environment. But the part that's been missing this whole time, because we've just not had the tools to know it, is really our genetics. And so that's the third angle that comes into this, or the third circle that comes into this integrated approach. Now you go to your doctor and you say, I have my genome scanned, because now we in fact can do that with a number of companies that have formed here in the Valley, of which, full disclosure, I'm on the board of one of them. But let me tell you, your doctor will go, oh. And because the education associated to genetics, this genome-based economy in healthcare, just has not been there. And I do believe that the government needs to really, as they look at the curriculum in science-based education, really does need to take a look at some of the fundamentals, which really have shifted. And it goes back to basic science and math, but I have to really make a plug for genetics.
One of the things that you know, so I feel really good in a way that in the stimulus package they were able to restore a fairly significant amount of funding for science and engineering and research, and so that's great. I worry a great deal though that this is a very short-term stimulus package.
Yes.
Right, and investments in research are really, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And in fact, you can do a lot of damage by throwing in a lot of money and then not following it up. You know, I mean, if you invest that money in infrastructure, that's fine, right? But if it's just to get a few more postdocs, and then they don't have jobs in 2 years, that's really not going to help very much. So I think there's you know, I think one of the things that we need to be thoughtful about is making sure that we're sustaining a level investment in basic research over a sufficient period of time to actually allow that to pay off and to be useful.
I think that means we have to chain our Congress people in a room and not let them out.
Well, and it also has to mean, there's something else which is a pet peeve of mine. It also means we have to kind of wean everybody away from earmarks. Because, I mean, one of the hallmarks of federal funding for science in the last, you know, well, it's been just getting worse and worse, certainly the last 10 years have been particularly bad, is we've seen more and more money, you know, going into the system in the form of earmarks. And the problem with that is that there's no real gate on is this being invested wisely? Is it going to the right people? Is there any accountability for what's happening there? It's more like, you know, well, I got X amount of money, you know, for this road, and I also got X amount of money for University Y in my district, right? And it's very hard. I mean, I've sat in rooms with a number of college presidents, university presidents, and everybody says earmarks are a bad idea. But everybody wants everybody else to quit taking them first. It's really hard. It's like a drug. It's really hard to pull away from on both sides, not just in the case of Congress, but also in the case of the people who are getting the money, right? That's a danger, and it's something that we've been letting creep into our system.
But it locks things up. It makes them sort of more rigid.
It makes them more rigid, and it doesn't really reward quality, right? It doesn't reward success.
Do you want to ask something?
Yeah, I wanted to expand a little bit the discussion, because when you started out, you were trying to decide whether you should ask about government or corporations first. And so I just wanted to make 2 points. One is that there's a missing entity that you didn't say, and that's the nonprofit sector. And I think that we should not underestimate the importance of nonprofits in this whole equation of looking towards the future, because in the end, it's nonprofits, and especially ones with endowments that will survive the stock market crash, that can actually think long term. Now, one of the problems with the nonprofit sector is they tend to be focused on end causes, and nonprofits have historically not funded as much basic science. And I think one of the shifts that we're seeing going on is some of them doing it. So number one, it's not just business and government, but nonprofit has a really...
You don't just mean academics. You mean the nonprofit
No, I'm talking
foundation.
about nonprofit foundations.
Okay.
And academia has a role to play in doing the research, but in terms of funding.
And Judy, just to be clear, this is Gates Foundation, Keck Foundation, those types?
MacArthur Foundation. Okay. I mean, Howard Hughes, if you look at some of the great research that has been funded, there are some really important foundations out there. And the reason I say this is I think that this inconsistency of funding that Rick pointed out is a real problem. You saw that when the NIH doubled the budget over 5 years and then stopped, and it just really hurt
very much
research in healthcare. But if we can, so this comes to the second point, I think looking forward we have to be innovative in coming up with some new models of collaboration between government, nonprofit, and the business sector. And we're going to have to be clever, because we've ended up with collaboration between government and business that we never thought we'd have in this country, in the financial services industry, in the bailout of companies.
I was about to say that when I hear innovations in institutions, what I think about is I think about the financial services innovation, which we thought was good for a while.
Well, but let's be proactive and think about what are some good models for government and corporations to be able to leverage each other's funding so that it isn't all falling on just the federal government. And the other part is, when you think about government business, there's been a piece missing from the equation. The government-business relationship has all been about large business, because that's who can pay for lobbying. That's who is represented in Washington with the constituency. Small business is not, and we really need to bring small business into that equation. And I don't have the answer sitting here or the time to even talk through the elements of it, but I think looking forward, if we are going to end up having a healthy innovation ecosystem, it's going to be the result of government, nonprofits, large and small business finding new ways to collaborate that we haven't seen in the past.
Go ahead.
Well, and I would also argue, I think that there's a huge value in having businesses that are willing to devote some fraction of what they do to long-term basic research. I mean, we don't have that many corporations these days that seem to be willing to do that. And there's a lot of investment in sort of advanced development, but the kind of long-term basic research where you publish in the open literature and you're part of the community and so forth, we haven't seen as much of that in the last 20 years.
There's very few companies that are willing to fund that. Now we have 2 representatives here, but.
And I think partly it's because people, it was funny, a few years ago, people would come up to me and say, well, how come you're just not outsourcing your research to universities, right? Or how about you just post some things on the web and see if anybody comes up with a good idea, and you'll pay them $1 million, right?
The prizes.
And those are fine. I mean, those are, it's a fine thing. We actually invest a lot of money in universities for Microsoft. About 20% of the money we put in basic research actually goes to universities. But I think unless you have your own basic research organization within the company, you miss out on opportunities that let you survive. And the way I look at basic research, especially as the company gets larger, it's really an investment in long-term survival, right? It's basically saying, if something really bad happens, we'll have the treasure chest of technology and people and thinking that will let us change and survive. And that was sort of the reason Vannevar Bush wanted to start the National Science Foundation. It wasn't for specific results. It was so that in case there was another war, or if there was a famine, or if there was a disease, we would have the smart people and the infrastructure in place to survive it.
I've got a question. So now we've got the economic equivalent of a natural disaster. We're not sure how big it is, but it's pretty bad. Okay, do we have the treasure chest of ideas?
I think there's so personally. I mean, I'm going along with Sue. I think there's a huge set of opportunities out there that we can go after. Whether it's in healthcare, where there's, anybody in the technology field that walks into an emergency room, if you don't have a heart attack before you go in, you'll have one when you get there. It's like, what's going on here? The last time I was in an emergency room, I got thrown off a horse, and I was having some buzzing in my arms, and it took 5 hours, to just get a CAT scan and have them say, oh, you're okay, you'll probably live, and send me out the door, right? And for half of that time, I think they just lost me. Right? Well, that doesn't make any good sense.
They just wanted to see if you were going to get worse.
Well, or they were hoping I was going to bleed or something to make it a little bit more urgent. But I think the point is that there's huge opportunities, to renovate our healthcare system, using technology that we basically have. But
you have it.
But we're just not putting it in play.
Do you think that we have it, or do you think that some of the technological challenges of healthcare have turned out to be more difficult than people expected?
So I'm with Sue. I think there's a lot of technology that we have in place, and there hasn't been the sense of urgency to bring it to bear.
Or there have been hurdles that, in fact, have been put in the way because of safety. And who is willing to even, one life, are you willing to say it's okay? You can't. So those hurdles have to be there. So the cost for all of these innovations to get to help us in terms of reducing this economic burden to us over time is actually very high.
But if you think, but just to follow up, though, if you think about a world in which, we may be less able to pay for our health care, we're going to have to figure out a way of making it more effective.
Judy?
I think also, and you just have to be careful when you're talking about healthcare, there are two different places where we're talking about innovation. And I think what Sue and Rick are talking about is the application of information technology to the healthcare system in order to lower costs and improve its care and efficiency. There's also innovations in medicines and med tech and treatments which improve the quality of your life and in some cases drive up costs if they're not used widely. So when you're talking about innovations in healthcare, you have both of these areas that are ripe to continue to, or opportunities for us to drive economic growth and save costs. You asked whether there's ideas. I think in all sorts of areas, there is not just ideas, there is necessity, there's needs, whether it is energy independence, climate change, healthcare, education, information technology applied to all of these areas. What there isn't is courage. We don't have the courage to go take the risks that need to be done, because when it comes to innovation, and whether it is the research that Rick leads or it's the entrepreneurs that Sue invests in, you have to plant a lot of seeds in order to get one thing to be successful. And you don't know what the outcome's going to be when you start. And overall, I'm not saying every VC, I'm not saying every funder, but overall as a country and as a business community, we've just lost our courage to take risks. And we have no incentives to take risks. But now we do, because we won't.
We have no choice.
Let me actually give you an alternative hypothesis, which you may think is nuts. Okay? If I look at biotech over the last 10 years, I see what happened was that people took risks,
and they didn't pay off. And what happened is that the people who took risks, and people took risks at the end of the 90s, okay, on the dot-coms, and what happened is you had a lot of failures, and people had, it wasn't that people stopped taking risks, that they had the risk-taking sort of slowly beaten out of them. So that the pharmaceutical companies right now are cutting their research staff, some of them, in part because they took risks and they didn't pay off. So I'm sort of leaving open, leaving open the question about whether or not, which is the chicken and the egg here, whether or not that we've had a period which, if we just had some big payoffs from things, that we could change that risk-taking behavior fairly easily.
So I think inherent in innovation is failure. You cannot have an innovation system that thrives without understanding that failure is a part of it. And I think pointing to failure and saying people are not going to take risks because of it is not the right long-term answer. Second thing is that there's a difference between risk and intelligent risk. And if you look at the last couple of years of the actual internet bubble as opposed to the growth that led up to it, and if you look at what happened on Wall Street with the financial crisis, that was risk without questioning. And that was gambling and not intelligent risk. And so that's not healthy risk-taking. That's not what I'm suggesting. It's very different from going all the way in the other direction.
Michael, can I pick?
Yes, let's go down. What I want to do right now is I want to go down, everybody, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll start taking questions from the audience.
I just want to pick up on the notion of failure and how important it is that we recognize something. So when I started in my venture career, which has only been recently, I used to be a corporate executive for 20-some-odd years, one of the things that we commissioned a study on was why is it that Silicon Valley has the majority, if you'd like, of the innovation and entrepreneurs? Why is it that Boston doesn't? And they're third in the country in terms of investments, et cetera. And you look, and we had a number of different attributes that were actually studied around this whole innovation, and it goes to Judy's point about courage. There was a number of those attributes that, for example, the infrastructure of legal, the infrastructure of accountants, the infrastructure required to help these companies get off the ground were fairly similar in both places. The number one thing that came back on this study and the survey was this notion of that failure is okay. In Boston, failure is not an option. It's not part of the culture. In fact, we really can't talk about it. For us here, we talk about it. You're in a startup, you go to another startup, and it's almost a badge of honor that you, in fact, did, because you were willing to have the courage to actually go try to do it again. So I think there is this cultural element also in innovation and courage that actually needs to be recognized.
So I do think that this is really the best time for innovation, because I don't think we can be worse than anything than today. so
That's a good way of putting it.
so I do think that this is really the best time to have all kinds of opportunity. You can pick any topics. So if you're looking at energy, we were so many $1 trillion deficits on energy, importing oil. So that can go and create lots of alternatives for the energy. And I think that will also forcing people to go and focus. You know, before in the auto industry, they go and say, oh, let's have the big cars and all that. Now they are more focusing on listening, maybe have the electrical car and hybrid car, electrical car. So this is the opportunity for any of the innovation, energy, and even for finance. I think we can recreate the finance. We can add into a lot of risk management into the finance. So I think education, we can revamp our education. It's the worst that I can ever see. So nothing can be worse, even worse than today. So I think we can, so I don't think it's a wish or courage. It's really a must done. We must go and do innovation. We must change. So I'm very optimistic.
How about you? Are you optimistic?
I'm always optimistic, but that's actually kind of a genetic thing, I think. In fact,
I haven't found that gene yet,
They sequence my genome, and they say, "Whoa, look at that one." I've never, we talked a bit about healthcare, but there's so many businesses now where I think we're really on the cusp of a very major change in what we're capable of doing. Right? We're now in the process, whether it's Microsoft or Google or Yahoo or Amazon or eBay or a number of companies, of building the most massive data centers, with the most amazing amount of computation and storage that you could possibly imagine. We're at a point where we're capable now of collecting astronomical amounts of information about all sorts of different businesses, whether it's medical data, whether it's environmental data, whether it's urban traffic flow data, you name it, whatever problem you think you're going to solve. We now have the ability to distribute sensors in the environment, the ability to collect huge amounts of data, and bring it to bear, and apply the same kinds of computational power that today we're applying to things like search, or ads, or things of that sort. Those are data-intensive, data-driven businesses that have proven to be tremendously successful. There's a lot of new data-driven businesses that are going to be very, very successful. And I think that, personally, I think that's where the climb out's going to come, at least in technology, is we're going to drive just tremendous change in so many areas. And if you just look in science, I mean, we're changing the way scientists think about their information now. I mean, we're working, in my research group, we're working with the AIDS community. For the first time, they're starting to think of all the data that they collect, as data, right, that you can apply algorithms to and do data mining on and pull something out of it, right? I mean, a lot of this stuff is just strings. We've been working with strings forever. So there's just a huge opportunity there. And I think that's where, I'm hoping that's where the next generation of innovation is really going to come from.
Because in some sense, the physical and intellectual investment has been done already, and you can build on it.
That's right. And also, we've sort of entered a period in which it's really in two forms, right? On the one hand, we now understand much better how to build these enormous computing infrastructures and tie them into the rest of the computing grid and the network, right? On the other hand, we're now capable of deploying and collecting data from just huge numbers of sensors, and of all kinds. I mean, the sensor is a very broad term, but of all kinds. I mean, people are weaving them into clothing. I've seen some of that's going on. There's a ton of stuff that you can do. So that combination of enormous amounts of data and the ability to process it, and a lot of really smart thinking, which frankly is coming from our investments in long-term basic research, I think that's where we're going to get to see a lot of change.
So just, I think somebody said something about interdisciplinary, and just a comment about Silicon Valley, and something that I think we're sitting here in Silicon Valley that we all need to think about, which is the future. There is no question that the future is about the intersection of different technologies, whether it is applying data, again, to healthcare, to energy, to environment. Even solving energy and environment problems takes multiple disciplines of science. What we haven't talked about, we've been talking about science, but the combination of science and the arts as design becomes more important, as we're finding that things from the arts, like virtual worlds and video game, that came out of video game technology, suddenly can help scientists do their work better. So the future is about the combinations of technology. And that means moving beyond silos. And if it means moving beyond silos in our education, moving beyond silos in our venture firms, who has a healthcare person and an IT person, moving beyond silos in the Wall Street firms, in the media that cover the firms, individually as we think about these things. Because you talked about collaboration when you're talking about the laboratory, this whole notion of interdisciplinary work and collaboration is going to become more and more critical to the innovation of the future. And it's not so easy to do. It is not that easy to take people from different disciplines. And so as we reinvent ourselves, reinvent the Valley, educate our kids, we have to think about how do you do it with people who have deep expertise but communicate across what are called T people, what I call double Ts, connectors, people who are just good at facilitating the communication, that are often the first to be discarded because they're not really great at anything, but they're good at lots of things. And so I would just encourage us all that, to say that the Valley's going to have to, in some ways, remake itself as we look to the future of innovation. And interdisciplinary and moving beyond silos and removing those silos, I think, is really going to be key.
Okay, I'd like to open this up to questions or comments from the audience. It's not going to be one of the ones where I say you can only give questions, but if you make a comment, please make it short and pithy, and I reserve the right to cut people off if they go too long, so just let this know. Okay, right over there. Wait for the microphone, please. And actually, why don't you say who you are, too, when you sort of...
My name is Madhu Sharma. I'm at Microsoft. So I have been feeling that there has been, over the last 10 years, just too much competition, and it's been very, very difficult for companies to make money. That's happened in computers, that's happened in biotech. Is that hypothesis true? Do you guys feel that?
I'll actually give you a data point, okay, which I actually just calculated this morning. Okay, if you look at after-tax profits for non-financial companies, the way that the government calculates it, corporate profits adjusted for inflation in 2007 were no higher than they were in 1997. So there was actually, outside of the finance sector, there was no increase in profits. Now, whether or not you call that an effective competition or not is not clear, but that's just what it is. Okay, yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't know, I don't have data to support this, but you're talking about two industries that started out as very young industries in the Valley, and over the last couple decades have become mature industries. So by definition, there's more competition. And certainly when I started my career in the Valley, in the networking industry, there wasn't a lot of competition because it was a young, very young, new industry. So some of it, and some of what we're feeling in Silicon Valley, is that our traditional industries that have fueled growth and entrepreneurship have matured, and we need to recognize that and adapt.
And competition actually is good. And when I graduated a long time ago, actually there are many companies in the computer manufacturing, but right now many of them are gone. So I think competition is not bad, and the best will survive.
I think that competition in journalism is a really bad thing. Okay, back there, please. Okay, yes. Wait for the microphone, please.
So my name's Alpa, and I'm with Microsoft.
Oh, wait. That's two Microsoft people. Okay, can you sit down? Let's actually take somebody else first. Okay,
if you promise that you let me ask my question.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Let you ask your question.
Okay, promise.
Okay, right down here.
I don't know, the whole room's not Microsoft.
Wait. I'm sure the whole room's not Microsoft. Are you from Microsoft? No. Okay. Okay. It's not that I have anything against Microsoft. I just want to break it up a bit.
I won't say I'm from anti-Microsoft, but I'm from Sun.
Okay.
Actually, we like Microsoft. So my question is, if you could step out of your personal life and look in, or actually step out of your company, or step out of the U.S. or even the world and look inside, what would be your favorite metric, or what would be a metric you would use to measure how bad the innovation crisis is, or how well we're getting out of it? And I ask that from a control systems sort of axiom that what you can't measure, you can't optimize on.
I'm ready to answer
okay,
that.
Yeah, I'm ready to answer that, but why don't you go first?
Okay, so when you are talking about disruptive or any significant innovation, you cannot measure it while it's going on. And the process of measuring it is going to stifle that innovation. That's not true of incremental innovation. So incremental innovation that is making processes better, you can measure your heart out and you can see what's going on. But when you're talking about more disruptive innovation, this notion of finding a measurement for it, you can measure it in hindsight. You can look back and you can gather data along the way and look back and see how well you've done. But measuring it along the way, that doesn't mean people aren't accountable. Doesn't mean you can't ask questions about what people are working on, what are their hard problems, and get your instinct as a leader tells you whether they're making progress or not, or whether they're doing good things. But this notion of measuring innovation, the other thing people often ask me, how do you know we have an innovation deficit? It's very hard to prove what's not there. And so that also is not something that's measurable. And how will we know when we get back on track? We'll know because our economy will start to grow again. And we'll start to see economic growth that is sustainable over a period of time. And that is the measure. That's the measure of the innovation ecosystem working. if you try to put tight metrics on it, you'll kill it.
I was going to say, I can't tell you how many different times in the history of Microsoft research where we've been doing something that nobody else in the company had any really good idea why the hell we were doing it. I mean, I remember this one project we were doing. It was really clever. I mean, it was a lot of mathematics. It was really cool. And we talked with the product groups, and the product groups looked at this, and they said, well, this is just really great work, but we don't actually have that problem. But you guys are really smart, and I'm sure if you work really hard, you'll figure out something that's actually useful. So 3 years later, they had that problem, right? This was back in the earlier history of Microsoft. It probably directly resulted in $300 or $400 million in revenue as a result of that one thing, and was a huge differentiator, from a strategic perspective. The point is you just don't know, right? And there's always danger, I think, when people try to manage certainly basic research, that they confuse the output of a basic research organization with what it actually does, right? And unfortunately, they're not really that closely related to each other. What the group does is do great research. What it produces are technologies and artifacts and things that actually have an impact on the business. Unfortunately, if you try to optimize for the output that you see, you'll pessimize the research because they're not actually related. The point of the research is pessimize, make it worse, or make it more pessimistic.
Okay.
That's innovative.
I want to
That's very
add some
innovative.
comments. So I do agree with what all of you said, but if you really want to go and do some measurement, I think there are some kind of tentative measurement, like number of patents and how many startup companies.
That's a
how
terrible.
many
Number of patents
number of patents
is a horrible metric.
So how many,
It's a horrible metric.
Okay, so give you some hints. And how many, for example, how many people...
the number of patents is how much money you wanted to spend on lawyers.
Okay. So
Okay.
that's only one of the...
No, that is the metric. That is exactly the metric. I mean, I know for a fact. Look,
let me continue.
we triage the things that we do
This is
based on the amount of money we're willing to spend. Right?
Get a lawyer.
Right.
I think another way to look at that is how many people are really coming, they come here to study the PhDs and stay here. How many people, how many countries are coming over here and set up their R&D in the United States? That's an indication. So if we go and see more and more people are setting R&D not in the United States, or people won't want to stay here, less high quality candidates, immigrants over here, then we should start worrying.
You want to add something?
The only other thing I would add, and I think Judy had alluded to this before, is that if you do put metrics in place, metrics tend to, unfortunately, confine time. And as it was said, the disruptive innovations usually aren't something that occur over quarters or a year.
Let me just add two things here, one which actually kind of contradict each other. Okay, one is that I kind of view technology in terms of its impact on the economy as fundamentally unpredictable. It's very hard to sort of figure out ahead of time which things are going to have big impacts and which things aren't, and which things are going to work well enough. Having said that, when I look back at this last decade and I sort of ask myself, how many innovations that we had that were sort of fundamentally compelling, okay? And I have a tough time kind of counting them up. That's what makes me feel retrospectively that there's a problem. Having said that, I'm kind of on the non-measurement side. Now I want to go back to our friend in the back row who I interrupted before. Okay?
Thank you. So I'm Alpa with Microsoft, and I have to say that I do agree about the panel's comments on investing in R&D, even though I do have an MBA.
But you use it for good, not for evil.
That's right. Of course, of course. We get washing machines to people, right? So my question is that, here we are in Silicon Valley, where Facebook had a valuation of $14 billion at the height of, sometime last year. And what I've heard from the panel is investment in R&D in fundamental research. So, and here we are investing in a lot of startups, VCs and so on, do a video startup or an online education startup or the next Facebook. So could you comment on sort of the nexus, the link between startups, entrepreneurialism, fundamental research and business models for it, so that in addition to the Facebooks, we've got more of the sort of the funding of entrepreneurial businesses and business models that go along with it. So that's my first question. And the second...
One question per person.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, who wants to take that?
I'll go.
Go ahead, Sue.
Wow. So I don't think that it's only funding basic research that is now occurring. I do think there's a lot of business model funding, which is the Facebooks and whatnot, that in fact are occurring across Silicon Valley in clean tech, in healthcare, and in IT. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that, and it's not just going to be about R&D. And I think it has to do also with the fact that there is this convergence. And getting out of the silos, again, as was mentioned previously, is something that we are looking at very, very carefully. Where are the industries that in fact need the technology innovations that have already occurred to be put into them because they have been just bastions or just establishments? And the utilities, as an example, is one area that in fact could benefit from that. So you're going to see a lot of business model funding as it relates to, for example, energy management, certainly both at the home or in companies, et cetera. And again, in healthcare, I mentioned the Ready Clinic, MediClinic, and a lot of different types of business models now that are starting to disrupt what the ecosystem looks like. So I don't think it's only innovation in only funding R&D, and we are looking at a lot across the board of funding business models to really bring some of these innovations to bear. Go ahead.
I was just going to add, I think we've kind of gone back and forth between talking about venture and talking about research, and what we need to realize, to have a healthy, ongoing environment for sustainable innovation, what I call an innovation ecosystem, you need balance. And so you need ongoing work in funding research. You need ongoing innovation in development, and in that development, meaning research is about furthering understanding. It's not about producing products. So you get discoveries and understanding and trained people, trained minds through the research process. In the development area, whether it's large corporations that at Microsoft have been working with Microsoft researcher universities, or startups that get ideas based on discoveries or ideas, there's that development community that translates things into products and services, and there needs to be ongoing innovation there. But you also need innovation in the application of science and technology, and that's where you're talking about new models for energy, for the environment, for healthcare, for education, for how enterprises do their data centers. Yep. Google's strongest innovations actually were not in their algorithms or their search engine. It is in their IT infrastructure and the way they do advertising and search and how they link that together. So you need balanced across all three of those, and you need communication between the three of those to end up with not just a spike in innovation, but ongoing sustainable innovation that is going to sustain economic growth.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, Cheng brought up something that should be explored a little farther. The Kondratiev wave, which is a cycle study actually developed by a Russian, Kondratiev, where he studied the length of time that a technology that sustained an economy lasted about a little over 40 years. And he looked over several centuries and found that this was a rather consistent event. And I wonder if we just look at the mainframe, for example. This started about the end of 1940, and it lasted until about 1990, which is about 50 years. Later in that point came the PC. It reached its first I'll call it, period of use for about that period, and then we got the internet, which then became a new thing which exploited the older technology in it, but it was a new technology, basically. And I wonder if we aren't really going through one of those Kondratiev cycles now.
Let me take that one, okay? I've never been happy with Kondratiev cycles, okay, because I don't actually understand them. I went and looked at them, and take what you just described, okay? Well, if you sort of think of the internet as a new wave, there's no reason why it shouldn't keep going at this point. So there's a little bit of sort of reverse data mining going on, where you look back at history and you sort of pick out the things that kind of work. The other thing actually has to do with sort of some of the institutional innovations, okay? Whether or not there's ones that failed, like the financial innovations or other types of institutional innovations that we would hope would actually influence these even if the waves have existed in the past, there's no reason to sort of believe that they have existed now, given the change in the environment. Having said all that, okay, it's pretty annoying that we're having this downturn right now, because what it does is it sort of brings back the notion that perhaps that we have Kondratiev waves. I find it personally annoying.
We're still functioning well after that period.
Yeah.
But the method in which it was being used changed.
Yeah. Okay, right over there, the person. Yeah.
And I have to add that mainframe is still alive. Well and healthy.
Yeah. Yes.
So I think there may be a different cycle. I'll throw it out as a hypothesis that we have had cycles where this country has invested in our shared infrastructure. Judy, when she started, talked about sort of the individual items, but I think there are also the collective items. And I think it's interesting that almost all the examples you've talked about where there's, I think, and I agree with you, strong pent-up demand are in our shared infrastructure. So, all the utilities, transportation, education, healthcare, our hospitals. If you think about when did we last invest in that infrastructure, that pretty much was in the 60s, perhaps a little bit in the late 50s, and tapered off at the end of the 60s. So I believe that we're sort of, we have this whole sector of our economy, which is public sector, not necessarily government, that is long overdue, huge pent-up demand. And I agree with, it's interesting, all of you have said, hey, we've got all these innovations, and it sort of ties together, I think, a lot of your comments. So there may well be a cycle, but I'd attribute it more to a cycle of investment in our collective or shared infrastructure. And the comment I'd make is that, Judy, you talked about courage. I think we also perhaps have a problem of prejudice in Silicon Valley where we've been anti-public sector. And in fact, the investment community, to a great extent, I'm part of that, has been anti-public sector and not willing to invest in, startups and utilities, oh, ho-hum, right? Startups in almost any of these places. So I guess what I'd say is I think we're just really due to do an investment in that cycle. And historically, we've done these cycles, I believe, of building our infrastructure and not just catching up, but getting that world-class infrastructure you were talking about, best of, above and beyond what others have. And then we've been able to power with that another cycle of growing into it. So we need to sort of overbuild our shared infrastructure when we have the chance.
I think the comment that was made earlier, this notion of, can you build, rather than just build infrastructure, build best-in-class infrastructure.
Yeah, and build ahead of our needs, so then we have essentially something to, then go through, power us through the next wave of perhaps non-public sector, private sector. So I'm curious, though, your thoughts about whether there's really been a sort of prejudice against that over the past period.
So I think that two things. I think there is a prejudice against it, and some of it is not justified in that it's just not as sexy as some of the other areas. But there is an element of it that is justified that I think we need to think about hard, because it's not an impossible problem to solve, but it's harder. And that is that some of these areas are harder for startups to do alone. And one of the things that was so wonderful about the IT industry is that there were pieces of it, whether it was software or hardware, that you could do as an independent company. And yes, you partnered with big companies to get some distribution, but you could do it alone. There are other businesses that, or other areas, and utilities are one of them. It's one of the problems in the consumer business where the mass and the branding and alliances make it such that it's just riskier for a startup. And so I think the trick in these areas is for people to be really clever about what niches that startups can pick and do well, and then how do those startups figure out how to collaborate from the beginning. In the biotech industry, partnerships between startups and large pharmaceuticals are part of the industry. That hasn't happened as much in the IT industry, and I think we need some, again, new models and figure out how to do that.
Outside of the IT industry.
Outside of the IT, yes. So that we need new ways to figure out how to do that so that you really can get the returns on that investment, because that, in the end, is what drives it.
Anybody want it? Okay. Back there. That fellow right there.
Hi, Dan Rosenberg from SAP, and I have a question specifically for Judy. If we accept the hypothesis that innovation is going to come at the intersections of these different technologies and problems, how do you envision that creating the kind of wealth that drives an economy similar to the invention of the telecommunications industry or the automobile industry? Because to me that sounds like important stuff, but medium size, and not something that's going to reboot the American economy.
Well, I actually don't think that, so I said at the intersection, and I maybe overstated intersection as opposed to the interdisciplinary nature applied to. So if you, again, look at the healthcare industry, that is not a small industry. And if you can make fundamental changes that impact healthcare, you can drive economic growth. If you can make fundamental changes in education, that you actually change and open up education so that people can sell different products into it, for instance, or curriculum, or make money by offering services, whether it is vocational training, community colleges, or K through 12. So some of these markets, like healthcare and K through 12, have been so locked up in their institutional models that there hasn't been a way to be disruptive and make significant money in them. But I think that if you look forward, Rick talked about the application of new data models to different industries, and I think that that can drive significant growth. Energy is the same thing, and the environment. So I think there are enormous problems out there that need to be solved, and it may not be, looking forward, that it is one industry that drives economic growth in the same way that telecommunications and computers and communications kind of dominated the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And it may be a cross-section of different things that drive growth, and that might be healthier because it's more balanced across industries.
Yeah, let me actually add something that historically, when you had industrial revolutions, scientific, that affected the economy, they were multiple industries simultaneously. That this one, which is based only in one complex of industries, is historically anomalous. Anybody want to add anything?
Well, I'll just add a couple of comments. I think one, it feels to me like we're at a point where we will be able to see a dramatic acceleration in a lot of sciences, because we're now able to apply so much computational power and data, data mining and data access in those areas. There's just a huge opportunity to be able to really understand a lot of areas. I'll just take within the field of computer science. There are a number of things like machine translation, which was languishing for a while. Suddenly it's really blossoming, and it's blossoming because suddenly we have access to enormous amounts of information. We can do analysis on that, and the machine translation systems are getting quite a bit better, quite a bit faster than they were just 5, 6, 7 years ago. And that you're seeing that same phenomenon happen in many other areas. This traffic flow analysis is an area where we're getting more and more information. There's a huge opportunity to be able to take that, either use it for urban planning, use it for traffic control, traffic management, or just individuals use it to manage how they get from point A to point B.
So you can improve commuting. Now
Ideally.
that would be a compelling application.
Yeah. Sadly,
They're
also
starting to
economic
do that.
contractions improve commuting too. So
Let me take one more question, okay? And let's see. That person all the way back there. Make the person walk with the microphone.
Hi. Rob Fernandez, Wells Fargo Bank, and also an MBA.
If I had known that, I wouldn't have picked you.
There's a few bankers here in the room. I'm sorry.
I know I made a controversial statement.
I really struggle with the public policy questions that have been raised, and don't want to throw water on unbridled innovation, but there's a presumption that innovation will come to fruition with some intrinsic social benefit, and yet if you look at the financial crisis, much of this was rooted in innovations that investment banks utilized to securitize, productize, and create risk correlation models that were used to sell the world markets on products that they could incorporate into more or less traditional portfolio modeling techniques, and that didn't work out so well. So the question I have is, how do we manage economic policy now to protect us better during this next wave of innovation?
Okay, go for it. You can't defend. Yeah. I'm not going to defend anything. It's okay. Sue? No, I mean it's a reasonable question.
It is a reasonable question.
Okay, especially when you get into the issue of sort of institutional innovations, which is what the financial was, which is. Yeah,
I think there's another thing. So I think it is one of the things that you're pointing out. What is innovation? Innovation is change. Is all change good? No, not all change is good, and some even good innovations can be used for harm or amplify harm as well as good. Look at the automobile and the number of lives that are lost with the automobile. But if we went back in time, most people here would probably still say that we should have incorporated the automobile into our culture. I think that, and I have a lot of people, I speak a lot about innovation, who bring up the notion of innovation in the financial system and as maybe a way to say maybe so much innovative thinking isn't good. I think the problem in the financial system is one of incentives and what type of innovation you're incentivizing and what type of culture you have. And we need to recognize we ended up here because the culture, our culture, the countries, over-incentivized short-term personal greed. And if we can switch and incentivize a more long-term building and creating and rewarding that as opposed to trading and not having anything to show for it, then you end up you don't want to regulate the types of innovation. You want to set the overall culture and guidance and vision towards rewarding, building, and creating, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's new products or new services, and discourage the type of behavior which is all about short-term, individual, get-it-now type of greed. And that, in the end, is what created the types of innovations you're talking about. So it's not about regulating innovation. It's actually about taking advantage of this failure that we've had, learn from it, and try to change, and look at our incentive systems to create that change.
Want to add something?
Well, I'll just say, I mean, everybody would like, innovation and progress to be a straight line, straight up, right? And it just doesn't happen to work out that way. I mean, I think it's clear that over a long period of time, investments in innovation have proven to be critical to our economy, our way of life, and the ability to have 6-something billion people on the planet. And if we don't continue to make those investments, we're going to regret that much more than we regret, the hopefully short term, in some galactic sense, period that we're going through right now, right? And I think that's something that we just, you need to continue to do that. I mean, I was on an NPR program one time, and we had callers calling in asking, like, well, but, aren't you worried that if scientists come up with some new idea, it's going to create some, terrible new thing? And, bad things happen, and they've always happened. Whoever invented the rock as a weapon, they picked up a rock, they looked at it, and said, well, this is a really good idea, and they hit somebody on the head with it. And that's bad things happen. The key point is that over a period of time, innovation is what drives success. It's what drives our ability to keep ourselves going, keep our economy going, and keep the country going. And we just have to make those investments. And we'll make mistakes, and we've just made one, and we'll probably make more.
So can I make a remark not on the policy?
Yeah, please.
So you talked about how can we pull out the crisis, and the government can help, company can help, and Judy add in non-profit organization can help. Actually, I think everyone can help. You can help. And we talked about, for example, we talked about the education, and during the reception time, and we have a conversation and saying that, maybe we need a lot more volunteers to go into helping the education. People who may be early retirement or retirement, or whatever, then maybe go and volunteer and teach and helping the kids. Reform the education. I think everyone can help. I think that we go and complete the ecosystem. So it's not just only the government and company.
Okay, Sue, you get the last word if you want it.
What an incredible plea, actually, I would say, in terms of, I wouldn't have expected to end on that note, but I must say that we talk about this crisis, and why waste this crisis? I mean, it is really all about us really trying to do something about it. And I commend you for having brought that up, and I'd like to end it in actually thanking everybody for trying to do what you can to actually pull us out of this. Thank you.
Let's have a big hand for the panelists, please.
Thank you very much, Sue, Joe, Rick, Judy, and Michael. We really appreciate you coming and sharing your perspectives in this very lively, dynamic conversation this evening. And as a small token of our thanks, we have some stylish and functional Churchill Club T-shirts for you. We hope you'll wear them in good health. And really, thank you all very, very much for coming. Look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good evening and drive safely.